Hey everyone, we're about to get to the video that you guys have been wanting for so long, the new year of Yu-Gi-Oh! Why am I having this section here that's clearly not scripted? Well, it's just to explain a small thing here. I apologize in advance that this video has taken as long as it has, but the main reason it hasn't was A, I had a rough time getting my thoughts down, and B, honestly, the stills were a pain in the ass. And so for this video, and probably for the rest of the series, maybe not the movies, but we'll see, I'm going to be releasing these videos with a still image and my audio. Because if you're watching this, you've seen the episodes. I say so in the video itself. You need to have seen the season to fully get what I'm talking about. So, honestly, this is just being done because the stills are an absolute pain in the ass, and I want to get these out to you guys. I really do. So, the next episode should hopefully not take quite as long as this did, many, many years. Especially considering the next one is one of the movies, so that shouldn't take me long at all. Either way, I hope you guys enjoy, and yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments. After all these years, I finally got my thoughts down the way I want, and you're all gonna hate me for it. Your move! The video you're about to watch is an in-depth analysis. If you haven't seen the show or this season, I suggest you watch that before coming back to this video. It's been a long time since I last made one of these videos. At this rate, the year of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is turning out to be the decade of Yu-Gi-Oh! But there's a lot of reasons I kept putting this video off this time. The main reason being I honestly just didn't want to do this season. You'd think I'd want to because for a lot of people, myself included before I did this series, this was the peak. Best duels in the series, it doesn't get better than this. If you do feel that way, I'm happy for you. I used to feel that way too when I was a kid. But watching it for this video, well, yeah, we'll get into that. The story this time around is a continuation from Battle City in Season 2. So we're back to Yugi and the gang having to stop Merrick from taking over the world by beating him in the tournament. There's slightly more things now to make it more thematic, like Kaiba now feeling a need to fully let go of his past. But in terms of a story itself, it's pretty basic. I'm sure the manga has more depth to it, but in terms of this, it's pretty standard. Merrick's goals are kind of clear. He wants to take over the world, and that's really it. But I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. This does lead directly from Season 2, so the story is the third act of essentially the first two acts that are present in Season 2. So I'll try to look at it from that term. One moment. The story of this arc is Yugi and his friends having to enter a tournament in order to stop an evil villain in Merrick, and for Yugi to discover lost memories of the spirit of the Pharaoh that lives in his Millennium Puzzle. Merrick wanting to take the power of the Pharaoh away from Yugi because he feels that with all of his pain and suffering he's lived through that he deserves to have that power, because he was protecting the Pharaoh's tomb his whole life, and yet all he got was pain, abuse, and the death of his father. Eventually, fully losing his sanity and embracing his dark side when he's reminded of that traumatic event with his sort of brother Odeon. Now, of course, this is all present in Season 2. So what does Season 3 add? Honestly, not much. I get that this is essentially the third act of the story, but here's the issue with it. Everything in terms of themes, character arcs, even really in terms of story progression, it all just feels like a step downwards from the virtual world stuff, or even Duelist Kingdom. But I will admit, there is a theme there, but a bit of a confusing one. The theme for this season appears to be tied to the past, and how the past affects you, and who you are as a person, which is honestly a good theme to go with, and it almost works. If there was a different reason for Merrick to be a villain in this season, honestly, I would say it works very well, and even better than stuff in previous seasons. But what makes it not work is Merrick. The way the season plays out, it appears that what it's trying to say is that it's best for you to embrace your past, because even if there is some bad to it, it still defines who you are, because if you let go, then you can lose all of what made you good as well. That is a lesson Yugi tries to teach Kaiba in their duel, and I'm pretty sure he learns it at the end? I'm honestly not 100% sure, but the issue is, Merrick is embracing his past. Merrick, this entire story, has been embracing his trauma and using it to lash out at the world, only for him to totally lose himself in a moment that reminds him of the trauma of his past. Then the way they defeat him is for Merrick to learn to move on from his trauma, and embrace his future, So literally the exact opposite thing that Yugi's trying to do and what Kaiba is trying to learn. It's difficult to make a message or theme work when every character on the side of good is saying what the theme is, but then have the villain be doing the exact opposite of what the good guys are saying to do, and then he has to do the opposite in order for the good guys to beat him. Now I can see the argument. Merrick did learn to embrace his past because he finally took responsibility for his actions. But that's not really embracing the past, at least not in the way that the show and characters are trying to show. The Pharaoh isn't trying to regain some of his memories, or regain the good ones. He's trying to regain them all. Yugi tells Kaiba to embrace his past fully, not just the good or just the bad. But Merrick here, sure, he's taking responsibility for the bad things he did this season, but he's also still moving on from the bad thing that happened, and not letting it affect him anymore. When before, it's stated that it still should because it still defines you. So that makes things a bit muddled for me. Now, of course, this is the least of the issues for me, because that is the closest it gets to me at being as good thematically as previous seasons. But there's also a lot of character stuff that doesn't work for me as well. We'll start with Yugi and move on to other characters, since, Yugi's the protagonist. Now, what is Yugi's arc? What is his change in this story? Nothing. He is our protagonist, and he does want something, but he doesn't learn any lesson. He doesn't get the thing he wants. Sure, he gets a key to unlock his memories, but he doesn't get the actual memories back. He's not even really the one to break through to Merrick in the final duel. And it sucks because more than any other character in this entire show, we have the opportunity to get into his head, because Yugi and the Pharaoh are able to communicate with each other. But whenever we do, for the most of the story, the dialogue between Yugi and the Pharaoh consists of,
"We have to save the world."
But what if we can't?
"We have to."
Okay.
There are a few scenes where that's not the case, but that's most of it. They do attempt to sort of give him a mini-arc in the four-way duel at the start of the season. An arc to have him stop protecting Joey and to let him duel on his own. But the reason that doesn't work is because they already did that in Season 1 in his duel with Rex. And after that duel, Yugi doesn't really help Joey, or stop him from dueling on his own. So it doesn't really make sense to do it again here. Plus, even if it did make sense thematically to do it, the only place it really fits in is that four-way duel. Afterwards, Yugi acts like he can still help Joey somehow, and not have him duel on his own. But that's not how this tournament works. What were they going to do if he hadn't learned that? Throw in the towel like a boxing ring and just say, "Joey can't duel anymore, sorry." Now, I know this is an ensemble cast, and that there are a lot of characters to get through. But it's a problem when the main character of your show, who's supposed to be the character the audience follows and endears with, doesn't change or learn anything. That's bad storytelling for a protagonist. Unless Yugi and the Pharaoh were always like that from the start, and the story's about how they are right and they refuse to change. But in Season 1, Yugi and the Pharaoh both learn a lesson. Yugi and the Pharaoh learn to believe in and trust each other, and the Pharaoh learns that victory isn't always the most important thing. Going from our protagonist having a pretty interesting character arc in the first season to not having one at all is really disappointing. If Yugi was meant to be the static character from the start and never learn and never changed, like Batman for example, then this wouldn't be an issue. But he goes through an arc in Season 1, Season 4, and even a little one in Season 5. They toy with one that he could have, mainly when Joey's put in the hospital by Merrick, where Yugi wonders if maybe they should give in or try to get away from their friends because by being friends with him, they are in danger. Which, if this was introduced earlier in the story, say when Yugi dueled and mind-controlled Joey and have him be a bit more distant from the others or refuse to let Joey enter the finals to protect him, then this could have worked really well. But it's something that Yugi considers for a few minutes, and then the Millennium Necklace just tells Yugi that Joey will be fine, and while he's still sad about Joey and considers the idea that it may be wrong, he just goes back to dueling, and that idea is never brought up again. The perfect opportunity to have Yugi have an arc to fit into the theme of the whole show. Is it better to stay away from your friends to protect them? Especially with how the show deals with friendship before this would have been really thematically appropriate. But that's not anything seriously considered, so Yugi really still doesn't have any sort of change. The other time we get in Yugi's head for something different than the usual end-of-the-world talk is when he duels Joey under Merrick's mind control, where it sets up seeds for Yugi having to duel on his own, which does work fine, but then again, it's only kind of a small little thing in the season itself. And that's in Season 2, so it doesn't even fit into this season here. And it's just more set up for later, really. So while it's nice to see, it just adds to Yugi's arc in the final season as opposed to really giving him anything in the Battle City story. The next character to talk about is Joey, who I mentioned in the previous Battle City video, who does go through some arcs in this season, but all of them are ones he's kind of already had before, minus his skill increasing as it went along, making it just less interesting versions of arcs from Season 1. That being both learning that his ego isn't as important as the safety of his friends, and him coming into his own as a duelist. There are ways that they could have had this work this time around, and it seemed like it was going in a good direction with it, but unfortunately, due to status quo restrictions and the need to make Merrick a bigger threat, Joey's arc fumbles before it gets to the finish line. Let me explain. We did have Joey's arc in Duelist Kingdom, of him becoming a better duelist the more he realized he wasn't the greatest duelist in the world, eventually getting up to Yugi's level. Now this time it seems like they're going through the natural progression of this same arc. Joey knows he's not the best, and he even promised to help Yugi beat Merrick, and now he's in Kaiba's tournament, the one duelist last time who berated him and told him he was no good. So now, Joey has the chance to prove to Kaiba and to himself how good of a duelist he really is. With Joey dueling a bunch of opponents Yugi previously dueled, and getting to the finals again, seems like they're getting to that point. But then how does this season, the finals, make that arc not work? The main reason Joey's arc doesn't work this time around is because of his last two duels. His duels against Merrick and against Kaiba. In order for this arc to work, Joey needs to win at least one of these. But he loses both. The one against Kaiba he loses royally, which makes it even worse. But let's start with Merrick, as that is the worst offender of the two. What makes the duel with Merrick so terrible is its ending, as Joey does technically outplay Merrick. If it hadn't been for Merrick's magic in his shadow game, and the rest of the duel went exactly the same in terms of their moves, Joey would have won. This is a huge problem. I understand the reasoning having Joey lose to Merrick. It establishes Merrick as more of a threat and gives Yugi something to worry about in his duel with Kaiba. If Merrick had actually outdueled Joey, won fair and square, then there wouldn't be a problem here. But the way it plays out, it seems more like an attempt to make sure the final duel of the season has to be Yugi versus Merrick, no matter how much it affects the story or the arcs that have been established. Now, I don't mean to rewrite the story, and I get having the big threat at the end of the season, but wouldn't it have been a lot more interesting for Joey to win this duel, putting the last duel in the finals with him and Yugi? I get the argument. Well, that takes away from Merrick as a threat if Joey beats him, but not really. Merrick has been toying with Joey the entire duel, and toying with all of his opponents in every duel he's been in before this. Have him lose because he wasn't taking Joey seriously. Have Merrick go ballistic and force Yugi to duel him after he defeats Kaiba. Then you can still have that epic duel with Yugi and Merrick, but have Merrick taking it seriously from the start. Then you can still have the stakes raised immensely while actually having a new sort of twist on the final duel. Joey needs to win Red Eye's back anyway, so have the final duel of the finals be between Yugi and Joey. Sure, it may be a retread of Joey and Yugi back in Season 1, but both of them have grown as duelists since then, and it would be the ultimate end to Joey's arc. He's finally on Yugi's level in every way, and he's finally worthy enough to get his Red Eyes back. Plus, you could have fun with Joey possibly using the Winged Dragon of Ra. Now, of course, who wins could work either way. I could see the argument for Joey winning, as it would be the way to have him go from being the worst duelist to being the best. But I could also see the argument for Yugi winning, because Joey winning may mess with the ceremonial duel and have Yugi lose some of his credibility when he will inevitably have to duel new villains later on. I think you could still make it work if the duel went down to the wire, but Yugi barely wins, with Joey doing well enough that Yugi gives him his Red Eyes back anyways. Now, of course, all of this is moot because we see in future seasons that Joey does have his Red Eyes back anyways. Not just in the Orichalcos art, which isn't canon to the manga. In the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, which is canon to the manga, Joey has it there too. So we know Joey defeats Yugi in their duel at the very end of the show that we don't see. So, seeing it in action would have been a nice change of pace, especially with it being teased in the duel with Merrick. Now, of course, if you didn't want to go down that route, you could work with Kaiba's duel with Joey. Since this is Kaiba's tournament, having Joey win this duel could be another great end to his arc, especially when the odds are so pitted against him, such as Kaiba using his Crush Card virus, which, side note, I always hated whenever he used it because it meant his opponent's deck was nerfed, thus the duel was less interesting to me personally. But regardless with how Joey's arc is in this season, if you can't have him beat the main villain in a duel, because you A, want him to remain a threat, and B, want to add in the idea that Joey was in over his head, then the best way to go about it, and to not only show how far Joey has come as a duelist, but really drive home how wrong Kaiba's mindset has been the whole time, then having Joey win would have made the most sense. Kaiba doesn't duel either of them after this, so it wouldn't really exactly make Kaiba less formidable. He would still be one of the top duelists in the world, and especially in this case where no one would even know he lost. But I get it, the people who make the anime don't want Kaiba to be overshadowed due to how popular he is. So at the very least, the bare minimum you could have put in here, to add depth to Kaiba and have Joey's arc work, would be for Kaiba to respect Joey as a duelist. Even if it's only in his head. Not told to Joey, but to the audience. You know, like they did in the actual original manga. So then there was even less reason to do it the way they did, because Takahashi has my way of thinking with it. So instead of bringing Joey's character arc to its proper conclusion, and even doing it in a way that the original creator and author intended, they completely fucked it and made Joey stagnate for the rest of the series. Because Joey really doesn't get any sort of development after this. So for them to have such a well-done arc for him just squandered at the finish line is just really disappointing. They even have this whole section of Joey of him dreaming that he's dueling in a new tournament, which I guess is supposed to symbolize Joey's fight to break free of the Shadow Realm, but it's really confusing if that's what it's meant to be, because you would think once Joey wins against the duelist in the finals then he would wake up, but he loses that duel. So it really is just there to waste time. Time that could have been used for other things, but I'll get more into that when I get to pacing and the duels itself. Next, let's talk about Kaiba. He is the one who has the most clear sort of arc. One that isn't really established till just before we end up in the virtual world. Kaiba wants to use this tournament and the original old Kaiba Corp Tower to bury his past, and bury any negative pain he's had to go through in his life, including the torture from his stepfather and his loss to Yugi. Now this is an arc that started in the virtual world arc, and half of Kaiba's arc is completed in that story, as Kaiba is able to bury any of the past involved with the stepfather and gain closure for that part of his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I mentioned back in my Season 1 video that Kaiba does have sort of a regression in Battle City, and I want to go more into detail with that. At the end of Season 1, Kaiba's become more respectful of Yugi. Sure, he wants to duel him again, but you can tell by how he speaks with him that Kaiba respects Yugi as a duelist, and as a person, and that he completely understands the circumstances of what happened, and concludes that his previous duel with Yugi didn't count. But now, all of a sudden, he's back to being angry that Yugi beat him, and thinks that Yugi stole the title from him, and even has the mentality of, my Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is so good, even Yugi couldn't beat it. What happened in between the seasons that Kaiba did a total 180 like that? Like, he went from not only being respectful towards Yugi and 100% believing everything that happened with Pegasus, to now disliking Yugi, thinking he cheated his way to victory, and doesn't believe in magic at all anymore? If there's been some explanation as to why this change happened to Kaiba, or even if his skepticism was used for something other than him just saying, it's all one big mind trick, then I could understand it. But it feels like the writers wanted to go more similar to how Kaiba was before dueling Pegasus, so they just sort of regressed his character back to being more obsessed with his loss in his past. Although having him be obsessed with Yugi defeating him unfairly doesn't make sense when Pegasus beat him too. Like I said before with Kaiba's arc in this season, if we ignore with what he becomes in Season 1 is that he wants to bury the past. Seeing his defeat by Yugi is the ultimate humiliation, and he wants to finally move on from it, by taking back his victory that he feels he deserves. With Kaiba losing to Yugi in the end because his priorities were in the wrong spot and he was more focused on his ego than what's really important. Mokuba being the linchpin and him finally learning that this whole tournament has become bigger than his ego, thus helping Yugi defeat Merrick. Kind of. We'll get to that when we get to the duels. Out of every character in this season with an arc, Kaiba's works for the most part. It's not like Joey's where it works until the very end when they mess it up, or like Yugi's who doesn't really have one at all. Kaiba's arc in this season has a beginning, middle, and end, and it all makes sense in the context of his story. Really, I only have issues this season with Kaiba's characterization compared to Season 1, and how stuff affects other characters' arcs and stories. Like I said in Yugi's section, Kaiba learns that it's best to not totally let go of your past, mainly from Mokuba, but that's still his lesson from the duel with Yugi, which works for Kaiba, but only for Kaiba. Like I stated before, Merrick's whole deal is doing what Mokuba told Kaiba, not letting go of his past and letting it define him and who he is. Yes, Yugi does say the reason Kaiba never beats him is because Kaiba lets his heart be ruled by hatred, which is what Merrick is doing, but that doesn't fit. Kaiba doesn't really hate Yugi, and really never gives off any indication that he does. He's mad that Yugi defeated him, yes, but he doesn't really hate him or really hate any of them besides Joey. Not to mention, Yugi, Joey, really everybody, they all hate Merrick anyway, or at least this evil version of Merrick, yet Yugi's able to beat him later, so that being Yugi's reasoning as to why Kaiba will never defeat him doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Not to mention, Joey has the same philosophy as Yugi, and Kaiba's able to beat him despite hating Joey. So having that sort of, I guess, a moral in there doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, we know the main reason Yugi won is because he has to get to Merrick, and if Yugi just said that Kaiba played a great duel, and didn't try to give him some reason as to why Kaiba lost other than Yugi played better than him, then honestly this confusing moral wouldn't be in here. But like I said, Kaiba mostly gets a pass this time. Him learning that this tournament is bigger than his ego, and that helping Yugi defeat Merrick is more important than his victory is done very well. Or at least as well as it could be, giving 4Kids the word the ones dubbing. But the character I really want to talk about is Merrick. Oh, Merrick. The same Merrick who makes it on top of everyone's favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Villains list. The most famous villain in the entire series, possibly only being beaten by Pegasus. I don't like him. Okay, he's not the worst villain in the series. He's still better than the Big Five, Duke Devlin when he was a villain, and is certainly better than some of the villains down the line. But best in the series? Not for me. The reason I don't like Merrick as much is honestly the lost potential with him. I like the original Merrick from Season 2 a lot. I love his look. I love his motivation. I love how he sees himself above his rare hunters and will mind control him to take out his enemies. I even love how he strategizes using Yugi's friends against him so that he can get what he wants. I mentioned in that video and in other videos, Merrick had an interesting motivation, but it came too late for it to really be effective. So now we're back to him being the main villain. Do we get more expansion on Merrick's motivation? Nope. He's a totally new character now, and a totally bland and boring one at that. Merrick has now become Yummy Merrick. He's gone from a man tortured by his father, and due to that torture and terrible home life, seeing the world in a more skewed sense and feeling he deserves to rule for all the pain he suffered, to just being an evil maniacal villain who laughs all the time and goes, "Boogie woogie blah 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 blah." He doesn't have interesting strategies, never takes the game seriously anymore, and keeps cheating in order to win, thus not making him a threat, but making the Millennium Rod a threat. I know Pegasus in Season 1 once used the Millennium Eye to enhance himself during his duels, but he still outplayed his opponents with genuine skill. Merrick, with every duel minus his one with Yugi, he's almost been outdueled by his opponent, and he either cheats to win or reveals that one of his cards has some secret effect, thus causing him to win. Yes, every duelist in this show has those moments where they reveal, oh, but my card secretly does this. But the issue with Merrick is it doesn't come off that he's been secretly planning this from the start, especially when it comes to his duel with Joey. It seems more like pure luck that he just keeps getting out of these situations. If Merrick ever had a moment where he, say, got upset during a duel and flipped his attitude, started taking things seriously, then I could see him being more threatening as a villain. One of the main reasons I feel Merrick is weaker here is just because we never really get into his head much or explore anything with him after he becomes the ultimate evil Merrick. Like, he claims that his motivation is still the same as it was before, but there are other things he could do to accomplish those goals other than literally sitting around waiting to duel. The original Merrick was proactive. He used his henchmen to spy on Yugi and his friends. He disguised himself to be close to Yugi to take him out later. This Merrick sits around until it's his turn to duel, when there are other things he could do to make his plan easier. For example, he could have gone to kill Odeon the entire time Yugi and the gang were in the virtual world. He could have tried mind controlling anybody on the blimp who wasn't Yugi or Joey, such as his sister, to try to lull the gang into a false sense of security. Or just mind control the whole freaking blimp. Tristan, Taya, Kaiba, all of his cronies. Make Yugi feel unfocused because everyone around him is under Merrick's control. Hell, even if he took someone hostage during one of his duels that he's not involved in, then that would be more proactive than what he does. I get that the main focus for him is Yugi, and he wants to get to the Millennium Puzzle. But could he do anything else? He doesn't even really taunt Yugi all that much. At least not till his duel. I can recall like maybe 3 times beforehand. And even the stuff with the original Merrick is more so just constant repeating of, I gotta get back to my body, with him not really getting any development until the final duel where he decides he's sorry for what he did. Not to mention, Merrick's strategies are kind of all over the place, in the sense that his deck itself seems to be completely different in between duels. In the 2 that we see here, his deck against Joey is very different from his deck against Yugi, as he seems to have an actual deck like everybody else against Joey, with plenty of different strategies and good traps and spells, but then when he duels Yugi, his whole strategy is all of a sudden, gotta summon Ra over and over, and now his whole deck revolves around constantly summoning Ra and beating Yugi with it. And honestly, I really think Merrick messed up on his shadow games. Well, not on the ideas themselves, but they seem kind of randomly placed. Giving Mai the shadow game to lose her memories, Bakura and Yugi are both ones where they lose their body, and Joey's the one where he loses energy and feels the monster's pain. Honestly, only Joey's is natural fitting torture from his perspective, since Joey's spirit is so hard to break. Sure, Mai's fits kind of well, but only because it's something they kind of added just before her duel with Merrick started, in her being unsure if she was a loner or could have friends. Honestly, I feel like Yugi and Mai's shadow game should have been switched. Mai is vain, so losing her body would kind of feel more fitting to her, but it's mostly just stuff with Yugi that would fit better. Merrick knows that Yugi and the Pharaoh are trying to find his lost memories. So what better way to torture him than to have him lose even more memories while he duels? You could still have the same stakes, have Yugi's body tied to his memories. So as the Pharaoh duels, they start to lose Yugi's memories. Have the idea that once Yugi's memories are gone, so is Yugi, thus the Pharaoh is gone too. Same thing with Merrick and his good half. Now we'll have more personal stakes for Yugi and the Pharaoh. Yes, the end of the world sucks, and losing your body sucks, but having the one thing you were trying to achieve not only be taken away from you, but actively more of what you're trying to gain being taken the more you fight, that would add a lot of dimension to the Pharaoh as well. Sure, we have that moment here, the typical moment of him being about to lose and trusting in his cards, but Season 1 kind of showed that while the Pharaoh had the bravery and determination, Yugi himself was the push and the heart the Pharaoh needed to win. So this could have been a way for us to see the Pharaoh at his absolute lowest, and added some dimension to him. But as it is now, Merrick just sort of picked up this type of shadow game because reasons. It's Speaking of Merrick's good side, that's something I also want to bring up. They bring up that Merrick has a good side and an evil side, and they sort of imply that once the evil side of Merrick took over, part of it still stuck with him and was making him evil. But they also established that Yami Merrick is a split personality, and that's not how split personalities work. It's not like they established that Merrick was like struggling staying in control when he did bad things. Merrick was just clearly a bad dude who did despicable things, and blaming everything on his evil half really oversimplifies his character. I get they're trying to show the heroes are good by forgiving Merrick for what happened, but it comes in way too easy. There's like one quick exchange of, why should we trust him? But we don't know enough about the good Merrick to really want him back other than we don't really want the evil Merrick around for obvious reasons. This would be a good opportunity for Shizu to actually have a point in this show. Well, a point after she's defeated by Kaiba. Because for the rest of the show after that, and especially this season in particular, she doesn't really do anything. She's threatened by Merrick twice, and even sits by Odion's side and just recaps what happens in Yugi and Kaiba's duel, to the point they literally cut away from their duel to her going, Odion, Slifer just attacked. Then they go back to the duel. Ishizu should have been used in the time in between duels to flesh out who Merrick was before he turned evil. Because if she's not going to be used for any story purposes or for any duels, then she could be used to help flesh Merrick out. It seems they're going that way at first, with how she tells how Merrick became evil in Season 2, but we need more than that one episode and scene to get a feel for Merrick. We know that he treated Odion well, hated his dad, and didn't want to be a tomb keeper. And that's about it. We're clearly not going to get into Merrick's head, so use Shizu to establish more things we don't know. What were Merrick's interests? How was his relationship with her before he turned bad? We need things like this to sympathize more with Merrick and see his dark descent. Pegasus and Noah both had enough of this for us to see where they were coming from as villains. But from what we know of Merrick here, he's just an angry guy in a cave who went nuts and tried to kill everyone. And for the best villain in the entire series, I just personally need a little bit more than that to see him as such. But now, we get to my final thing I want to talk about. The duels themselves. Which is what a lot of people really are coming to the show for anyway. And I can forgive a lot of what I talked about here, if it wasn't for these duels, because man, I got a lot to say. Mostly about one specific one, but we'll get to that. We have 5 duels in total this season. We have the 4-way duel with Yugi, Joey, Merrick, and Kaiba, Merrick versus Joey, Yugi versus Kaiba, Joey versus Kaiba, and Merrick versus Yugi. Which is the shortest amount from any previous season, as well as this is only half a season and the end of another story being told. But the issue comes in with the writing of the duels themselves. Now, of course, suspense is a good thing, and a lot of these duels do have good suspense, and even a lot of cool moments. But a good duel is like a good action scene. You have to choreograph it properly, have everything make sense, and don't let it overstay its welcome. But most of the duels here all break those rules. Since there's not as many as usual, I'll discuss them in order. We'll start off with the 4-way duel, which, if I'm being perfectly honest, is a duel that I really have no problems with in terms of the duel itself. Yes, there is that weird scene where we have Yugi needing to protect Joey all of a sudden, but like the virtual world arc before, it does bring in a new twist to the game we hadn't seen before. We get to see a lot of cool moments and even ways for their strategies to work well with each other and against each other. Honestly, the fact that this is the only 4-way duel we get in this series is really disappointing. If we had found a way to do this again, I think we could have gotten some cool moments. So, not really much to talk about here. Joey vs. Merrick is also a duel that for the most part is pretty good. It does have the issue of most of Merrick's duels, where the gimmick of his shadow game kind of overshadows the duel itself, and Merrick's whole strategy, instead of playing the game properly, just appears to be to drain Joey's body, as there are several points where Merrick is just using his abilities of his eels, when he doesn't really need to in the context of the duel itself. Not to mention his Health OMer's effect. While it's cool and does add stakes to Joey's hand, it's really convenient that it just always picks up Joey's best cards. I get that it's for suspense, but for that to happen every time when it's supposed to be random is a bit hard to swallow, but not too terrible. Plus, I'll admit, Joey's use of Question was a great moment, which is another card I wish stuck around, as it not only fits Joey's aesthetic, you could pull that sort of twist more than once of bringing out some surprise monster because the opponent got it wrong, or Joey sends that card to the grave on purpose. Not to mention Merrick taunting of Joey with Lava Golem was pretty great too. Honestly, my biggest issue with the duel is the ending, and while I won't repeat everything I said before, they really should have found a way to have Merrick outduel Joey properly. Yes, it would use to establish that Ra is a powerful monster, but with what they use it for, with it dealing no damage to Joey's life points, it just established Ra as a powerful monster in this specific situation. I'm not against Merrick using the Winged Dragon of Ra to win, as it would have been a way of showing how him, Yugi, and Kaiba are all just in a different class now compared to Joey, or that Joey is in over his head. Merrick has the ability to add to his dragon's attack, so honestly, if they just would have had Merrick win with Ra as opposed to winning with Ra because of his cheating shadow game, then I wouldn't feel like Joey got cheated out of a victory. That and the fact that it knocks Joey out into a coma that he's able to wake up from, yet everyone else can't, is a little strange to me. Plus, some quick side note in this duel specifically, what the hell is instant attack? On the wiki, it's an effect that lets Merrick attack with Rod no matter the circumstances, but here it's used when he could just attack anyway. It's his turn, so why is he activating instant attack? There's really no reason to. But now we get to the big one. Yugi versus Kaiba. Another one that's considered top of the line, creme de la creme, top 10 duels of the series. And it's been part of the reason I've had such a hard time making this video. Because to me, this is easily one of the worst duels in the entire series. Because I could discuss the problems with this duel forever. And the sad thing is, I want to be on your guys' side with this. Yugi and Kaiba are the ultimate rivalry. I want to love this duel, but I'll explain. And I apologize in advance because this is going to be a long section. Firstly, this duel is way too long. Now, why am I talking about length? I should enjoy the duel, and besides, a lot of the final duels of the season are around this length, and this is Yugi and Kaiba, so why shouldn't I be happy about this? For a few simple reasons. Yes, there are final duels in the seasons that are close to this length, but nothing at exactly this length. This is the longest duel in the entire series. This is longer than Yugi and Pegasus, Yugi Kaiba and Darts, Yugi vs. Atem, and even Yugi vs. Merrick in this very season. And even those duels are sort of just stretching for time as it is, because really, from all angles I can see of this duel, it's just unnecessarily long. From the Saturday morning side of things, you're spending a month and a half worth of Saturdays watching this duel go on. I remember as a kid, me and my friends liked the duel, but we wanted to get to Merrick's duel by that final episode, and even looking at how it would be watched on DVD now, if you just straight up binged it, this duel is a literal 2 hours long. 3 with commercials. And I don't know about you, but I personally feel spending 2 hours on essentially one action scene is too much. Especially when it's not even the big final duel of the season or the series itself. This wouldn't even need to be as long as it was if it wasn't for the pacing and how terrible it is. I understand needing to cut away for suspense, to check in on other characters, but there's too much of that here. With previous duels, the entire cast was at the stadium watching, so whenever it cut away, it would only be briefly, so we could see what the cast thought about the duel itself going on. But now, we cut away to Joey in the hospital, or Ishizu with Odeon, and quite frankly, a lot of it isn't needed. I can understand having maybe one cutaway to Joey for each episode, but we don't need to see Ishizu and Odeon, and we especially don't need to see half an episode's worth of flashback to the ancient past. Okay, this is one big thing with this duel. This big flashback. I understand why it's here. They've been teasing the entire Battle City tournament that it is Yugi and Kaiba's destiny to duel again, and that history is repeating itself. And because of that, we may finally see who the victor was all those years ago. But here's the issue with it. First, it doesn't need to take up literally half an episode. It didn't need to show Egypt destroyed and then go around looking for what's going on. If it just cut to Yugi and Kaiba seeing their ancient selves, then it could have worked just as effectively. And honestly, with the advent of hindsight, this scene also makes me a little more annoyed, because of what we see here. Not only is it largely pointless to the duel itself, minus a sort of addition to Kaiba's arc, but what we see doesn't actually happen when they get to the ancient Egypt stuff later. Yes, the gods turn to stone, and the pharaoh and Seto do fight, but they imply here Seto's working by himself against the pharaoh, and that's not what happens at all. He's mind-controlled by his father, so we're wasting time on a flashback to something that doesn't even happen. Not to mention the whole idea of who won between the Dark Magician and the Blue Eyes, history repeating itself, and we'll see the true victor. Well, Dark Magician wins here, and Blue Eyes won in the past. So it's not really history repeating itself at all, is it? But I'll get more into depth about that when we get to the Ancient Egypt stuff. Here's the biggest issue, though. The duel choreography. Now, I mentioned this before, and I've gotten a few people ask me, how can a duel have bad choreography? They just play what they get, and we see how it goes. Well, this is the perfect example of terrible choreography with the duels. I'll give some examples, or at least the biggest examples. For those of you who don't care about the game and the mechanics, I apologize because this is going to seem ranty. Okay, so Yugi's strongest monster is his Slifer the Sky Dragon, who has the ability that for every card in Yugi's hand, it gains 1,000 attack points. Yugi also has a card called Life Shaver, which for every turn it's face down on the field, the opponent then has to discard a card from their hand once it's activated. So here's my issue. We see here that Yugi uses Exchange to take a card from Kaiba's hand, and then Kaiba gets to take a card from his. This card here, this Life Shaver card, is the best example of terrible choreography. First off, if you're Yugi, why wouldn't you play a card like that face down the second you got it? Not even just because its effect is stupidly useful, but also because if you know you're going to use Exchange, it's a card that can literally cripple your best monster. And then when Kaiba gets it, he also doesn't play it immediately face down. So Yugi and Kaiba are making stupid moves to make the duel last longer, or to get it to the point they need to get it to, which is terrible. And it makes no sense for them not to be using this card right away when they get it. And if Kaiba did use it right away, he would have won. So this is even an example of them playing badly just because Yugi has to win because he's the main character. Not to mention the duel is really even bad when it comes to plot device cards. With Kaiba, I don't mind him having cards we've never seen before, because, well, he's rich, and established to have access to every card in the game. But where's Yugi getting all these crazy cards? He's not winning them, because his opponents never use these cards either. Something like even Change of Heart, which they go out of their way to say is Yugi's favorite magic card, despite him never using that card before in the entire series, and it was even established to be the favorite card of another character. Life Shaver falls into this category too, as Yugi doesn't have it before this duel, he doesn't have it after, and he doesn't even use it here. So this card was put into Yugi's deck just so Kaiba could steal it. Wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense for Kaiba to just have this card in his deck from the start? It's a card that can cripple Yugi's best monster. If Kaiba's designed his deck to beat Yugi, you'd think he had that card in there in the first place. Not to mention the Dragon Flute moment. Something me and my friend have used to describe completely bullshit plays that make no sense ever since we saw this scene together on our rewatch. The example is a scene where Kaiba plays the Flute of Summoning Dragon, which lets him get out 2 dragons. Every duel before and after this, that's the whole effect. But now, all of a sudden, since he's dueling Yugi, oops, there's now another effect where Yugi can play a card too, even though Kaiba's attacking and the card's effect's already finished. Not to mention that Kaiba himself is surprised at his own card's effect. I'm sorry, but you can't just change the card's effects like that, so that now Yugi gets benefits too. This is the writers literally breaking the game and cheating so that Yugi wins even though they wrote him into a situation where he can't. They don't give Yugi a new card to help him win, or have him use his old cards in a new strategy. They just change the effect of an already existing card for this one duel, and then it goes back to normal. So basically, Yugi cheated to victory. Great. You shouldn't have to change the game so your protagonist wins. That's just lazy writing, but I'll stop here. I can go on about this for hours. We have other duels to talk about. I'll move on to the next one. Joey versus Kaiba. This is another one that honestly is fine for the most part. Yes, it uses Crush Card, which cripples Joey's deck, but both players do play some good moves. Even if by the end of things it is really completely pointless, as it doesn't play into Kaiba's arc, and it doesn't add anything to Joey's either since he loses. But I won't get back into that again. I do like the moment though of Joey summoning out Blue Eyes with Monster Reborn and how angry that gets Kaiba. Comedic moments like that are nice, and I wish we had more of those. Finally, let's talk about Merrick versus Yugi. Ignoring everything I said before about the Shadow game itself and how Merrick doesn't take anything seriously, the duel does have its fair share of problems. Firstly, Merrick's deck just seems to completely have changed from before. Now his deck just seems to be revolved around him summoning Ra over and over again, like I mentioned before, and him summoning the same monster repeatedly. It gets old. We watch this show to see the variety in the monsters, but seeing a player just play one card over and over and over again, yeah, it gets boring. It's like if you were watching Iron Man and all Iron Man did to fight was just shoot his Unibeam over and over again. It's cool at first, but it gets old after a while. Not to mention, they make a big deal about the card Kaiba gives Yugi to help him win, and he doesn't win with it. So they have all this hype for a card that, while cool to see Yugi use, doesn't use to win. So it's pointless. Finally, I'll even point out that Yugi's card Ragnarok, while cool visually, it's really an awful card, and I'm glad we never see it again. Sure, it's cool to see all of Yugi's monsters, but why would you remove every monster you have in order to use it? I know this is a long video, and I rambled quite a lot, especially about that Yugi versus Kaiba duel. I also understand that this season is a lot of people's favorites, and I don't mean to take that away from you. But I can't with any confidence say that I like this season as much as my personal top season. Does it have its fun moments? Yeah. But there's too many issues with the duels in the story for me to fully enjoy it. If they would have fixed Joey's arc, give more dimension to Merrick, even gave Yugi something to do in terms of his character, and wrote the duels themselves better, then I feel this could have been as good as we all thought it was as kids. But as of right now, it's probably right near the bottom for me. But I do still like it overall. It does still have a lot of cool moments, the animation's good, and most of the duels are still exciting. So honestly, with all that out in the open, I have to give this season and arc as a whole a 5 out of 10. I'm sure the manga writes it better, but there's a lot of improvement they can do. I'll see you guys next time for Yu-Gi-Oh! The Movie, The Pyramid of Light.
You keep on playing,